you, Bob. You could have shortened that. So what I'm going to talk about today is something that happened in my hometown. So as Bob mentioned, I'm from New Orleans, born and raised, have never lived anywhere else. And it seems that New Orleans keeps on being in the crosshairs of disasters beginning in probably even before 2005 with Katrina. So I was actually at an ASCE convention in Miami the day that the Hard Rock Hotel collapsed. And a bunch of folks came running to me on and off through the day saying, have you heard what happened in New Orleans? And I said, what happened? And they said there was a major collapse of a building. So this is the story of that disaster. So a little bit about the Hard Rock Hotel. So what I'll do is first talk about what the plans were for the Hard Rock Hotel. So no one plans for their structure to collapse at any time. So what were they trying to do with that property? Then we'll look at the collapse. We'll look at the location, the timeline. Before they actually could demolish the building, they had to demolish the tower cranes. I'll also talk about some preliminary citations that OSHA published, and talk about how we learn lessons after we experience a large disaster of this magnitude. So there's a photo of it. A little bit about the streets. This street here, running kind of right on the edge of the right side, is Rampart Street, and the street where the streetcar is moving perpendicular to that goes behind the building, is Canal Street. So Canal Street used to be the main street of downtown New Orleans back in the day in the 50s, before people moved into the suburbs and we had major malls develop. It was also the street that back when New Orleans was a very young city, separated the French and the Creoles who lived in the French Quarter from the Anglo-Americans that lived on the other side of the street that ultimately became the Central Business District. And the street is wide. It has a nice median, and the reason why New Orleanians call medians neutral grounds is because back then, the Creoles and the Americans didn't really like each other that much. And so that dividing line in that along that street, that median, that grassy area between the two sides of the boulevard, was called the neutral ground. So when you go to a Mardi Gras parade and someone's on a float, you'll ask them, what's the float number? And you'll also ask them, is it the neutral ground side or is it the sidewalk side? So you know what side of the float that your friend's going to be on, so you can go and wave to and hopefully catch some beads. So let's focus more on the Hard Rock Hotel collapse. So it's incidentally a little while, just weeks after this disaster occurred in New Orleans, there was a similar construction failure. Both disasters ended with 3 people dead. It was actually, I think, Mustang Engineering's new headquarters in Houston, in Katy, construction issue. I haven't followed it, but you really didn't hear too much about that failure. Not the way that you heard about the Hard Rock failure. And part of the reason why is it's in an area with a lot of tourists, and tourists tend to hold, well, we all hold our cell phones up all the time. And tourists in particular are videoing as they're moving around because they're in a new town. This is where they're visiting. So this guy, this young man, Michael Del Mole, was driving down Rampart Street toward Canal. You see the Hard Rock on his left, he stopped at a red light. So he's at a red light and he's got his cell phone camera going and he's videoing his drive along the edge of the French Quarter. And he just happens to be driving at just the right time. So let me play this video for you.
Oh my God.
So the light turned green.
God.
Michael's not driving. Notice that green light. He didn't move. He was stunned by a major structural failure that occurred right in front of his eyes. And thank God he was stopped at a red light. So now let's talk about what the developers had in mind. This building, the Hard Rock Hotel, was in the works for a while. In fact, it originally originated with a gentleman named Kalis, a developer, who wanted to replace the old Woolworth store at the corner of Canal and Rampart. So this is a picture of the Woolworth store circa 1960. Take a look at that car. He wanted to replace it with a larger building that was more of an entertainment complex. And when he talked to and got the Hard Rock business, the hotel side of that business involved as a franchisee, so I guess they're licensing the name, it became necessary to ask for a waiver, or because they needed that hotel to be taller than the 70-foot restriction. So he did get that waiver and was going up to 17 stories. He could go up to, I think, 160 feet. So the original plans were for a hotel that would cost about, it gelled into ultimately a hotel that would cost about $85 million. The developer, again, Kalis Companies, it's actually an LLC, so there's a few other people involved in the development of this property. The contractor was Citadel Builders, local firm, very well respected. The structural engineer, Heaslip Engineering, a local firm, very well respected. And the architect, Harry Baker Smith Architects. The crane implosion cost around $5 million, and ultimately D.H. Griffin Wrecking and Lemoyne Disaster Recovery out of the Lafayette area, once it was decided to implode, that they handled that. And ultimately a conventional demolition was decided upon at a cost of about $8.4 million, and Cobb Grading with Marshall Wrecking was the companies that were involved in that. So that's a little bit about who is involved in this. Now here's what the developers envisioned. So 1031 Canal Development LLC is named that because 1031 Canal is the address of the old Woolworth store and now the Hard Rock Hotel. Well, now it's an empty lot. So here's an isometric rendering. It shows a rooftop pool. You see these green, these are actually steel moment frames. And so 1031 Canal was going to be 18 floors, 100, oh, I'm sorry, I said 160, it's 190 foot tall. 350 hotel rooms, over 12,000 square feet of event space. And the lower 7 or so floors was not steel, but reinforced concrete, and very different construction framing system. And that was the 400 parking spaces, some retail space on the first floor, and they were hoping to get a major restaurant on the prime first floor square footage. This is other renderings. So this is from Rampart Street looking kind of east, southeast. And this is looking down Rampart at the hotel. So nice looking property that was envisioned in this location. So a little bit about where that location is. So here is the state of Louisiana. Looks like a boot. This block is what you see here. You see this is Lake Pontchartrain, which is for most people in the metro area to our north. We have the Mississippi River meandering around. The French Quarter is that little red outline, and the dot is the Hard Rock Hotel construction site. Incidentally, see this crescent? So this is the older section. So the oldest part of the city's French Quarter, and here we go, Central City, Garden District to Uptown. So older part of the city looks like a crescent. So that's why New Orleans is referred to often as the Crescent City. So blow up a little bit in the rows. Here's the Mississippi River, that turn. Oh, here is the French Quarter. Rampart Street is on the northern edge of the French Quarter. This is Canal Street. You've got the CBD. Here's the Superdome, that big white circle. And so one of the reasons why the city was interested in making a concession to this developer is there was a lot of action going on in the CBD. And then you see the purple line, that's the interstate. And you see along this edge, the yellow portion of the Mississippi River is our convention center. So there was lots and lots of redevelopment and re-energizing of Canal Street closer to the river and along Convention Center Boulevard because of all the influx of all the folks in that area. And right here at this northwestern tip of the French Quarter, that part of Canal Street had some properties that were really in great condition and well used, but other properties not so much. It was an area that was prime for redevelopment, but also prime real estate, right on the edge of the French Quarter, the edge of the CBD, and very close to the Superdome. So the city was talking, and these talks started probably 2 decades ago initially, when it was supposed to be an entertainment complex, ultimately gelling into a Hard Rock hotel that required the 70-foot restrictions to be lifted so that it would be a viable project. So right in this corner of the French Quarter is where the Hard Rock Hotel is. And the this is the French Quarter is a very, very historic part of the city, very, very jealously guarded by the Vieux Commission. And so you'll see in a later photo that the French Quarter, because it's old, dating back to the 1700s, the city was founded in this location in 1718. Some old buildings, but anything new has to remain very well below even 70 foot. But because Canal Street was an economic center for the city well before we started thinking about historic preservation, the very adjacent areas are not under the purview of the Vieux Commission, but under the, oh my gosh, it's the Central Business District Historic Conservation District Commission. It's a very long word, but they are the entity that is stewarding the historic nature of this part of the city. And the historic preservation requirements are relaxed in comparison to those of the properties within the French Quarter that don't butt up against Canal Street. So there were some complicating factors in this location. So you're in, this happened in October. So we're just, we're dead in the middle of heavy convention season. And this is pre-COVID, so because it was 2019. Here's the building. The yellow are those cranes. This is Canal Street going north-south. On the top, running east-west, is Rampart Street. So there was some historic structures there. The Saenger, right across the street, this big orange box, is we have our Broadway shows. It's a historic structure, has historic status, and lovely. We'll see some pictures of it later. The Lowe State Palace Theater opened in 1926. Another beautiful property, not as well used, could use redevelopment actually. The former home of the Pickwick Club right across the Canal Street from it. Some other smaller properties on the same block, mostly historic, but with no historic designation. They included Junius Hart Music Company, McRory's Five and Dime, and the Alamo Theater. There was some other in the block just to the east. The New Orleans Athletic Club, which is the oldest health club in the United States, and some small Creole-style cottages that are over a century old. So, complicating what you want to do when you have to demolish something that's pretty darn big. Another issue is in February, well, typically it's sometimes March because it is Mardi Gras. Mardi Gras Day itself is the day before Ash Wednesday, which begins the Lenten season, which is 40 days, but by the old calendar, before Easter. And Mardi Gras is actually a celebration in New Orleans that lasts probably over 3 weeks. We begin with marching clubs and smaller parades that are with small floats that may go through the French Quarter itself, but culminating in about 2.5 weeks of actual large carnival cruise parading. And the one of the typical downtown routes, you can see this is the Zulu Club that marches, that parades on Fat Tuesday itself, along with Rex. And this is the CBD. Here, the purple is its typical route, other than, see this dotted route? That would be what they would be, where the parade would go typically. It actually went around because of the collapsed Hard Rock site. Some of the streets were closed and fenced off, so they had to adjust their routes. So the downtown routes were all adjusted. And you can imagine how many people are in New Orleans for Mardi Gras. So again, this was 2019 when we still had Mardi Gras in person. So it's pre-COVID. Here's the Saenger Theater. So it's right across Rampart Street from the Hard Rock, built in 1927. It's lovely. The architect was Emile Weil. It's Italian Baroque. In fact, it is supposed to, it's supposed to evoke the feeling of being in a courtyard. So when you're in the theater looking up, you see the night sky with the constellations twinkling above your head. And here's the courtyards that are overseeing you, supposedly in an outdoor plaza, but you're in a historic building. So at the time of the collapse, there was a major production of Cats. So it was running two weeks. So it had run the week before, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And the collapse happened on a Saturday morning. So thank goodness it did. If it had happened on a Sunday morning, we would have had the last matinee for Cats. This posed a challenge because initially the perimeter that was, because the collapse occurred and it was on the Rampart Street side, the Saenger Theater was shut down. So the second half of the Cats production was not able to be done, to be completed. And all of their sets and costumes were within the building. And they had to move and go to Atlanta for their next production. And ultimately, they were able to access their sets and costumes, but I'm sure they were really under the gun timing-wise, so that they could maintain their schedule for the rest of the year. So lovely building. There are other historic structures. Again, these structures without historic designation. This is the building, really up close and personal to this building, posing a issue when you talk about demolition. So, oh, and here's the name of that commission, the Central Business District Historic District Landmarks Commission. I had it wrong. A little bit about Rampart Street. So down the median and under the streets of Rampart Street, the street that is now going into the distance, you can see the neutral ground. At that location, it's a major location of many utilities. So telephony, sewerage, storm drainage, electricity, natural gas. These major lines serve, right behind these taller buildings is the French Quarter. So we've got a lot of smaller boutique hotels and smaller hotels in the French Quarter. Lots of people actually live in the French Quarter, lots of businesses. So those services are critical to the functioning of a large portion of the downtown area on the east side of Canal Street. So you have to protect the underground utilities that are going, that are under Rampart Street. So here's a timeline of the collapse. October 19th, actually it was October 12th of 2019, we had the collapse. Everyone was focused on these tower cranes that were damaged in the collapse. They were on the side of the damage, and some of the falling debris pulled especially the eastmost crane out of plumb. And so we were just going, October is well into our hurricane season. In fact, we're what, June 8th? We started June 1st as our hurricane season. We don't, it doesn't really end until November. And even though late August and September are typically the months that we see the most activity of major tropical storms and hurricanes, you can actually have a hurricane in October. In fact, I got married in 1985, the tail end of October, and it was, what's the date? October 26th is my anniversary, and we actually had Hurricane Juan. So yes, we have hurricanes that can hit the city. Even storm fronts can bring with them associated high winds. And so these two damaged tower cranes, the focus was one, securing the building, finding out, going in, search and rescue once you ascertain that the structure is safe enough to allow for that type of activity. And then focus was on taking down the cranes. As I mentioned, 3 workers did die. They were working, it was a Saturday morning, they were working overtime, and just chose the wrong day to work overtime because the hotel was hoping to open in time for Mardi Gras 2019. So the implosion of the cranes occurred in October on the 20th. Then the discussion moved to what actually happened. Is part of the structure salvageable? Because remember, I mentioned that the top part, the hotel part, was reinforced, was a steel frame. The bottom part's reinforced concrete, much chunkier, but if you think about issues associated with what caused the collapse, perhaps part of the building could be salvaged. We move into Thanksgiving, and once you get into the holiday season, they're still talking about should we do partial demolition, but it's starting to look like no, probably not. Should it be then? The mayor actually said, okay, we're starting to get closer to Mardi Gras. I want this thing down. I want it down fast because it is in the middle of where we're expecting thousands and thousands of tourists to visit in the Mardi Gras season. We hit Christmas, and implosion's not looking so like the best idea. It's actually expensive. We've got those historic properties right adjacent to the building on the riverside. We've got a major utilities running along Rampart. We've got the Saenger on the north side across the street from the site. So we go into Mardi Gras season. Things kind of shut down for the city, Mardi Gras season. And then we hit the governor stay-at-home order because of COVID. And as you can imagine, I think most decision makers of most cities around the world were having a lot of talks related to COVID and how they were going to handle things. And so the Hard Rock probably, well, it got pushed back a little bit. In April, on the 2nd of April, OSHA publishes their preliminary citations. We're going to take a look at them later on in this presentation. By then, it's decided to do a total demolition and one that's more conventional, hopefully to be completed in January of 2021. So the demolition begins the middle of May of 2020. The one body was recovered early, but there were 2 bodies that were left in the building for an extended period of time because they could not be accessed. The last body was recovered August 18th. The city sues the developer August 25th. The building is back in national news because there's a fire of construction debris. I do have a couple of photos. And then the January finish of the demolition is pushed back due to bad weather to March of 2021. And actually it was pretty close. It was the tail end of March, but probably the first week of April when you could walk up everything. Canal Street and Rampart Street were totally reopened, and you could walk up to a fenced area and just see a leveled site. So this is a picture of the cranes and after the failure. Let's first now talk about those cranes. So there are 2 tower cranes. They're out of the Morrow fleet. They're Lieber cranes. One is 270 foot. One's about 300 foot. The east one, which is the one on, where's my cursor? I'm losing it. Where'd it go? That's the only bad thing about a white. Okay, there it is. So the eastmost one you see here, it's the one on the left side. The black line is totally upright. And the yellow line shows how much the crane is leaning. The other crane, a little bit shorter, it's on the Canal Street side. It is not as damaged, but it is swaying and damaged somewhat. So it's decided to take both of these cranes down. The major cause for concern is, even though the cab is pretty heavy, those counterweights. So on the short horizontal piece, these counterweights run about 50 tons. So they're way up high, not easy to access, and you've got something extremely heavy that's just waving in what possibly could be high winds from a storm front, a tropical storm, or a hurricane. Let's get these suckers down fast. So an implosion was decided upon. The evacuation zone is this red zone, and a temporary exclusion zone of orange was extended, so no vehicles or pedestrians. Again, we're a tourist city, and this is ground zero for tourists. So a lot of interest, not only by the tourists, but by locals in seeing this demolition occur. So it took a lot of logistics to ensure that people were not outside. People, you warn people, but some people, especially when they are sitting on a rooftop bar in a hotel fairly close, are going to want to have their hurricane and watch the implosion as it occurs. So this shot, these are two photos actually of the folks that are setting up the explosion. So no one, it was deemed too unsafe for anyone to walk or stand on the crane tower themselves. So here's another crane, the white crane, and you can see here, this is the left photo. You can see two gentlemen in their fluorescent yellow emergency vests and hard hats. Unfortunately, their cage is the same color as the tower crane steel, that school bus yellow. These black packets, those are the explosions. So those guys are hanging from a cage next to a building that has collapsed, putting explosives on crane towers that are damaged. This is a little bit better of a photo. So here's the cage, the gentlemen that are in the cage, not on the tower crane, placing the explosions. So this is the best depiction of a Morrow tower crane. This might not be the exact model, but it's very, very close. So you can see right at the intercept of the vertical tower and your horizontal jib, you've got the cab, which is pretty heavy. Actually, all the pieces are heavy. And then here, on the short end, that's the counterweight. You've got these tension pieces. So let's see where they put those explosives and see what the thoughts were. So explosives here and here to disconnect these tension members. This is a pin here right at the cab. So disconnect these because they wanted to make sure this counterweight came down, and this part's supposed to fold into the tower. This part's supposed to fold into the tower. This is supposed to disconnect it. It's supposed to go down, just like folding your umbrella. So you fold the umbrella, the ribs fold in, and then you put the telescoping middle column down, and you store your umbrella. So that was kind of the thinking of how these tower cranes were going to come down. So let's see what happened. So this is a photo of the demolition right when the explosives were detonated. I've got a video. So here's the video. It's going to run first from this view, and then it's going to switch and run from another view where you'll see the Canal Street crane, how its horizontal jib gets kind of caught up, hanging over Canal Street. So let's take a look at this video. It's a little long. So everybody's either glued to the TV or close enough to see, but safely, hopefully. There they go down. That's good so far. Oh, look at the east one. The top goes down as like a spear, and the Canal Street side, we've got this arm hanging, getting caught up on the moment frame on the west side and hanging over Canal Street. You'll see in a minute the implosion from that side. So from a point of view of success, I think it's fairly successful. We've got the counterweights. They were actually flung into the building, so they caused more damage in an already damaged building. but you've got those very heavy counterweights. So that's the Canal Street side. They did not want a lot of this to get hung up. They wanted those pieces to come down lower so that they could be chopped into pieces more easily and then trucked away to some site where there's some disposal site, hopefully reuse site. So there's that westmost crane hung up on this moment frame of the steel framing, and this part is hanging over the building, over Canal Street, causing Canal Street to continue to have one side of it closed to traffic, and so that whole area is fenced off. So the area along Rampart Street and Canal Street, fenced off, no traffic still. So once it was decided that to do an old-fashioned piece-by-piece demolition of the hard rock, taking a look at the first priority was once to carefully remove debris so that they could access the two remaining bodies of the victims that had remained for months in the site. So here's the Rampart Street side running at the top, and one body was located between the 8th and 10th floors, and another body on the 9th and 10th floors. So one in particular, this one, they knew exactly where it was, but you couldn't access the body without removing so much of the structure, and it was deemed unsafe until they started demolishing the structure. The other body, they were not quite sure where it was. So here's a timeline of the demolition. So you don't see traffic opening to Canal Street for quite a while. Let's move now to OSHA's preliminary citation. So talk about what possibly could have caused this issue with this structure under construction so that it had such a high-profile collapse. So I'm not going to talk about all of them, all of the citations, just the ones that I think are pertinent to this presentation. But let's first talk about OSHA. So OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Act of 1970, created OSHA. So Congress with that act created a federal agency that is authorized, whose mission is to safeguard working men and women. So they do that by setting standards and enforcing them. They also provide for training and outreach. So the act covers most private sector employees that are workers and some public sector employees and workers in all 50 states and certain territories and jurisdictions. So when I started looking at this, and because I'm a civil engineering professor at a local university that teaches structures, I became someone that the media would call upon to answer questions about the disaster. And so I started really looking into this a little bit more in detail than I would ordinarily have. And so when it comes to disaster investigations, if it's private buildings and there's been a loss of or an injury of workers, OSHA will be the lead agency. NIST will be the lead agency if there hasn't been any injury or loss of a worker on the site. Sometimes OSHA relies on NIST to do a comprehensive report. If it's a transportation piece of infrastructure, such as a bridge, then the National Transportation Safety Board comes in and does a comprehensive report there. And for natural disasters, such as earthquakes or hurricanes, ASCE may put together a team of experts from one of the institutes, the National Science Foundation, some other entities may bring in experts to come into the location of the disaster and try to ascertain what happened before recovery efforts cover up all of the evidence that they will use in order to try and make those determinations. So private buildings, NIST or OSHA, in this case, we had 3 workers lose their lives. OSHA was the lead agency, and they then issued their preliminary citations. So a little bit about OSHA categories of violations. So and we're going to move from the least onerous to the most serious. So de minimis, it's a technical violation that has no direct implications on health or safety. There's no fine or penalty. Other than serious is a non-compliance violation. It is related to health and safety, but it didn't end in a serious or fatal injury. There are fines. Serious is when OSHA finds that the employer possesses knowledge of a hazard that could potentially affect employees' health or safety. There's a bigger OSHA fine. Posting requirements, that's a violation that an employer will have decided on if that employer fails to post required safety documentation. A repeat violation is one that if the employer was previously cited for posting, it's a much bigger fine if it's a repeat violation. A failure to abate is if that employer does not take action on a violation, and it's an accrued fine. And the worst violation is the willful violation, which OSHA deems that is a case of purposeful disregard and is extremely serious. If it's linked to an employee death, it can be considered criminal, and that type of violation has the biggest OSHA fine associated with it. So let's take a look at these violations. So this is actually a copy of some of the OSHA preliminary citations. This one, Heaslip Engineering, the structural engineer, it's citation 1, item 1, deemed serious. So remember, willful is worse than serious. This is all about, and I boxed it, the beams on the 16th floor being under-designed, the western side exterior bay not tied to a rigid portion of the structure for the upper floors between certain column lines, and those are the column lines on the east side. And then the cantilevers on the 17th and 18th floors exceeded the manufacturer's guidance for maximum spans. So, serious violation. Here's a willful violation, the worst type of OSHA citation. So again, Heaslip, the structural engineer, this is citation 2, item 1. OSHA says that the structural steel connections are inadequately designed or inadequately reviewed or approved. More than likely, the steel provider designed these, but the structural engineer reviews and approves. So they are cited, and those inadequately designed connections affected structural integrity. So columns spaced too far apart, the span too big. You can Google a recent article in our local newspaper, the Times-Picayune States Advocate, pardon me, States Item's older one, where a California professional engineer who does expert testimony actually took a look at a lot of documents that were available also to the OSHA investigators, and has, again, so far, no comprehensive report is even planned by OSHA or by NIST. And this is, there's a lot of lawsuits, so there's a lot of experts that are now being hired by those involved in these civil suits. No criminals. I don't think that anyone has been served with a criminal violation. So this is just civil court, but it's going to be long and it's going to be messy. This is another one. This is for the contractors, Citadel Builders. So talking about floors 9 through 18, so those are the steel, that's the steel framing. Citadel failed to ensure drawings or plans for beam shoring that should have been on the job site. You can also Google this. I did not add the video here, but here's a shoring piece. So this is holding up a upper floor while the concrete for that floor is being poured. And this is a a Hispanic worker who took a video and sent it to a friend who then, after the issues with this building, sent it to a reporter who it then made both local and national news. So talking about how the shoring was bent. Now, in my mind, there was, and that probably led to that citation for Citadel. Perhaps a factor in this series of failures that caused this collapse. But what's more worrisome for me is this is a Hispanic worker. He saw something days before this collapse occurred. Did he talk to his supervisor? He doesn't speak English. Does his supervisor speak Spanish? And this is something that I don't know. I do know that, well, from speaking with a reporter, this gentleman did not speak English. But were these workers legal? So are we really allowing, are we enabling, are we empowering these workers to go to their supervisor if they see something that looks awry and let them know? Because perhaps this collapse could have been averted, even if this shoring did not have anything to do with the collapse or had a minimum amount of to do with the collapse. Having somebody go take a look days before the collapse may have let them see that we have some deflections that look suspicious, and maybe they would have stopped work and gotten the workers out of harm's way. That's all maybe, but again, this is another possible problem with this collapse. So Suncoast Projects, here they're cited by OSHA because the employees performed steel erection activities on the steel beams on the 16th floor, and they didn't connect them to the columns on the 15th floor per the contract documents, and did not meet the specified load requirements. So you read these, and if you're used to looking at the transportation, so the NTSB's comprehensive investigation reports, these read odd because OSHA is all about worker safety. Their job is not to come up with causal factors in a disaster. So they do sometimes do a more comprehensive report, but as I looked more and more into this, NIST is the agency that actually has the personnel that could do this, because OSHA is just not, it's not an agency that is tasked with doing comprehensive investigations on why this happened. They're all about worker safety. So some recent issues I talked about. October 21, a one alarm fire. Here's the smoke, and you can see another crane out there assisting with the demolition, the piece by piece demolition. They're taking down a lot of the steel and cutting it up. And someone had a torch cutting pieces of steel so they could be placed on trucks and removed, and construction debris caught fire. So here is a cage with our NOFD putting out that fire. So end of year one conditions, as far as the demolition, they thought that the demolition would be completed by January 2021. But by October 2020, Looked like it might be extended, and so the revised estimate of completion was March, and actually the last truck of debris was removed in early April of this year, 2021. At this point in time, the City Council was urging the City Planning Commission to consider revoking that conditional use permit, that permit that allowed the developer to go beyond 70 feet to that 190 feet. And there's recent talks because now the developer has a cleared construction site. He cleared those 3 other buildings, those 3 smaller historic buildings that did not have actual historic designations. Come to find out, some of the folks that are involved in part of the LLC have ownership of those sites. And so now we have a larger footprint. Hard Rock is still, from what the developer says, still on board, and they want to redevelop the site as a Hard Rock hotel with different structural engineer and a different contractor. And the City Council is leaning toward revoking, they're still leaning toward revoking that conditional use permit. If they don't get that ability to go as high as 190 feet, I don't think a Hard Rock hotel will be built at that site. So this is a photo of it around January of this year. This is a photo March 30th of this year, just that little bit of debris left. And by the first week of April, second week of April, all you had was a cleared site. So I'm going to move to, oh my goodness, I'm over time. I've got 3 minutes. So this got me because I was always under the impression that we had a more intentional way of learning from failures, and then from lessons learned, making changes to standards. I got involved with Cross US. So this is an entity that looks at, it's actually, the international organization is based in the UK, but it's based on the US model used in aviation. So FAA has a separate entity that where people involved in aviation, if they see a potential or a near issue, a near miss or a failure, they can confidentially report this to this entity that then will advise other agencies and associated organizations involved with aviation of things that might be trending that need to be changed in order to keep workers, pilots, the flying public safe. So when you think about risk, you think about these major failures, but under normal operations, you may have near incidents. Then you may have incidents that they're small, but there are a lot of them. And they may not, in the green zone, cause injury. Then you have others that do occur and cause injury, but those ones that are major, that they're not as many. Often it's the ones that cause injury that pull in the regulating authorities such as OSHA. But Cross is interested in allowing people to confidentially report things that near miss under normal operations, incidents that don't cause death or injury, or incidents that cause injury. Cross realizes that in the case of the Hard Rock or other high-profile failures, often because of litigation, we may not find out what truly happened because cases can be solved out of court, settled out of court and sealed. Even when they're settled in court, things can be sealed. And so often we may not be able to learn that much from failures that result in fatalities, but often we can learn a lot from other things if we have a way of capturing that. So I'm going to go really fast. This is the process. If someone sees something, you can make a report. The report's processed. We have an expert panel that takes a look at it. The everything's scrubbed, makes it anonymous. The report is published, and then that report can influence change. So we have 900 reports processed to date in the US. There's also similar sister organizations in the UK, Germany, South Africa, and Australia. So here's a listing of the EXCOM and the expert panel for across US. I'm going to move really fast because I'm now 1 minute over. Things have been extended to include not just structural safety, but fire safety. So CROSS used to have a different, the acronym used to have different words, but as of March, when we added the fire folks, it's now collaborative reporting for safer structures. It used to be confidential reporting for structural safety. So far, not mechanical, not machinery, not automotive, not aerospace, but if it's any civil structure, and we've added fire to that, if you are aware of issues, this is the entity where you can make those reports confidentially and then make a difference so that perhaps that type of issue won't come up in the future. So that's all about public safety. So you can sign up at www.cross-safety.org/US. Spread the word, submit reports if you see an issue, and encourage others to submit reports. So with that, I'm going to end. I'm sorry I'm 2 minutes over.
Well, thank you very much, Norma Jean. Really appreciate that very informative presentation, and hopefully none of us ever personally with our project experience that kind of situation of an unexpected collapse.